Hello, my name is Ron Simmons. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm in recovery from drugs, alcohol, sexual addiction, and anger. Uh, and this is my testimony. Uh, I was born in Glendale, California, one of three kids, the oldest. I had two twin sisters, and the first part of our childhood was very good, uneventful, just typical kids. And then about the time I turned six, I was we went to visit my grandpa and grandma, which we did periodically, almost every year, and in California. And that's when my grandfather sexually molested me. Now, I was so young that I really didn't understand what was going on, and it didn't really, affect me that much. I didn't know what to make of it, and so life stayed the same. You know, Later in life, I learned that shaped a lot of my behavior as I got older. And, after looking back, I really realized that. But I was a good kid till I did good in school up to my freshman year in high school. And that's when I was introduced by some friends to marijuana, and I started smoking marijuana the summer prior to my freshman year. And this was the 70s, early 70s, 74. And, the mentality back then with a lot of the kids, it was experiment. That was the big thing. Everybody did experiment with every kind of drug known to man. It was that era. And I started getting into Valium and Quaaludes and some cocaine and lots of downers, smoked peyote, took mushrooms, and just at that point, it was fun. It didn't have any negative ramifications in my life until my sophomore year when I wanted to continue playing baseball. Because of my adventures in drugs, my grades suffered greatly. I did well going into high school, so I was still academically eligible, but then my sophomore year, I could no longer play baseball, and I think that was the first thing the first negative thing that happened directly related to my uh, drugs, whatever it was, and started drinking. Didn't always drink to excess, but occasionally I would do that. And life was for the first couple of years of high school, life was a party. And rock and roll and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as they put it. And I ventured into all of that. And it stayed fairly benign, other than the drug use itself, until I was 14, and me and some friends were out late one night, just wandering around, being, stupid hooligans. And we walked across these train tracks that are in Phoenix. And one of the guys I was with had this bright idea. Let's switch break the lock on this switch and send the train into a different direction. So they went through and started trying to break the lock. Wasn't working. And one of them found a flare and lit it and tried heating up the lock to break it. That didn't work either. Out of frustration, he threw the flare up way up in the air. And then we, started to get ready to just go do something else. And as, about 10 minutes later, as we were starting to leave and cross over these flatbed cars, train cars, all of a sudden as we approached, flashlights shined in our face from underneath the train. And we were told to freeze, get on the ground, and we were arrested by Federal Railroad agents. And this was going to be my first brush with the law. Now, amongst these friends, I was 14, others were 13 and 12. The rest of them were like 13 and 12. And the cops assumed I was the leader. So they were going to come down on me. And at one point, when I was at the police station, they told me that I was looking at possibly 5 years in prison. And, at 14, I'm like, oh, dear God, what have I done? Well, they came to find out that about 3 months prior, actually I was 16, my mistake, they found out that I had went with a friend who joined the Marine Corps, and when he was filling out his final paperwork at the recruiter's office, and the recruiter talked me into doing this test to see how I would do if I took the main test and what I could do if I joined the Marine Corps. I went ahead and took the test and did okay, and never heard anything after that until the police officers or the detectives said, we show here that you've talked to the Marine Corps recruiter, and we're willing to make you an offer. If you join the Marine Corps, we will drop all the charges. And I'm like, well, at least I'd have some freedom. 5 years in prison, that just scared the crap out of me. As a kid, that, the thoughts, you've watched these movies where, people get beat up and raped and all this stuff in prison, and, the thought of going to prison was like, I had the opportunity to not do that, so I agreed to join the Marine Corps. And at 17, I joined the Marine Corps and went off to boot camp. And that was a culture shock. That was an experience I'll never forget. And it was pretty scary, but in the end, I liked what I was going to be doing, and my first duty station came to be Okinawa, Japan. And I'd basically never lived anywhere but Phoenix, where I grew up, and LA, where I was born. But we moved when I was young, so I didn't know anything about the world, and it sounded like a great adventure. Not so much. Found out, that I'm on this island, that there's nothing to do but get drunk and do drugs, pretty much for entertainment. So my drinking and drug career was perfected in the Marine Corps. And I got in trouble quite a bit, got in fights. Back then they weren't too worried about, possession or anything like that, but, the effects of how it affected you when you interacted with other people was more the issue. Did you get along with your fellow Marines? And I didn't tend to do that very well. Got in numerous fights, and after 2 years, decided I didn't want to be in the Marine Corps anymore. And I'd been in so many fights, and I'd hurt my hand real badly, broke my wrist and part of my hand in a fight, and I says, this is, not productive for me. I talked to a chaplain, and after some coaxing, he got me a general under honorable discharge, and I was released from the Marine Corps. And that's when my drug use took off for the worst. I started through a friend, I started doing cocaine and heroin. And I have to say that heroin was phenomenal as far as I was concerned. The high was quite enjoyable. Problem was, the addiction wasn't, and when you couldn't get it, the withdrawals were worse than painful. And during that drug use, I started doing, selling and selling drugs myself, and I got arrested several times, put on probation, and finally, after putting me back on a second probation, the courts decided that I was going to go to prison instead. They were going to violate me and not reinstate me. And I ended up doing 3 years in prison. And that really was the point where I had a spiritual awakening. I've been going to this church that I grew up in for a very long time, and I had a very good mentor, and he mentored me through recovery while I was incarcerated. And that was the first time I had my first experience with Celebrate Recovery. And it definitely changed my life. I didn't stay in Celebrate Recovery, but I became basically a member of, AA, because I related a lot with those people at the time. And that started my sobriety. And I later then realized that all these steps that I was practicing were biblically based. It was a God thing. And that's when I decided to start attending CR. And it truly changed my life. But I still went to AA, but I also did CR, so I could relate with those who were not Christians and try to set an example, because it talks about in AA a higher power as you understand him. And I wanted people to see who that real higher power was, You know, it wasn't just some inanimate object or anything like that. It was a living God. And without him, trying to stay in recovery, stay clean, and take control of even the simplest things in my life, I couldn't do it. And I realized that I had to turn everything over to him, stop trying to take the wheel and messing it up. Let me handle it. Now, I can't say I'm perfect at that aspect, but I'm a whole lot better than I used to. Often it won't be a conscious thought. I'll catch myself realizing I'm trying to control something I have no control over, just by the evidence of how that endeavor is going, which is usually not well. And so I've slowly released so many areas of my life to him. And as of May of last year, I celebrated 20 years clean and sober. And the thought of that still baffles me and blows me away, because where I was at in my heroin use, I thought, this is how I'm going to die. I'm either going to die of an overdose, or I'm going to end up in prison for the rest of my life. And that was going to be my lot in life. And to think that I could make it 20 years without using or drinking, there's only one way that could have happened, because I couldn't have done it myself. It was God, and allowing him to take control of every aspect of my life. But yeah, 20 years clean and sober. Now, recently I realized through CR that I had an addiction to pornography. And that was an area that I, it was in the closet. I'll give you all of my life, but I'm hanging on to this, God. And realized that was not going to work. And it's been a harder struggle with that than any of the drugs and alcohol, because fortunately for me, God decided to remove the desire to use or drink. It wasn't there anymore. I could be around it, and I had no inclination, no desire. He removed that for me. And that in itself is a miracle. But the pornography, this was going to be difficult, and it's still a struggle. I'm staying clean from that, but it's a constant battle to guard my eyes and my heart, and not let those thoughts and actions into my life. And you watch something on TV, and there's beautiful girls, and everything's so sexually orientated that it's not helpful for someone who is battling with a porn addiction. But he has helped me to be able to brush by that. Beautiful women on the TV, they're beautiful, but I no longer have the lustful thoughts. And there is another miracle, that he decided to do for me. And 10 years ago, I started going to the Nazarene Bible College for music, and met my wife, my future wife. And we've been married 10 years. And I thought I'd never, that would never happen to me neither. And she's a great Christian woman who supports me as much as she can in her own human capacity. But she and I, let God try, to run things. Sometimes we both, let the devil mess with our serenity, and we'll catch ourselves, yelling at each other, and then within 5 minutes after that happens, we feel God saying, this is not what I want for you guys. You're in it to support each other, and I'm in it to support you guys. And as long as you keep me in the center of your marriage, you will flourish. So I would have to say to anyone who is struggling with whatever it is that makes you lose focus and affects your life in a detrimental way in one shape or form, that CR can be that answer, because it covers such a wide area. It's not just about drugs and alcohol. It's about other things that we battle with. Anger, pride, codependency, just a number of things. Anything that is causing you to not be able to stay connected with God and lose that focus. And so at this point, I'm going to continue doing that and working through the steps and meeting more and more phenomenal people who have struggled with even more than I went through, And the biggest thing I want to be is an influence for those who come in and they don't think, they're going to make it. And then they hear what you've been through, what each of us have been through, and how through God, we're able to defeat that and learn how to deal with that. That they can do it too. That there's hope for them. They haven't done too many bad things, because we serve a forgiving God, all forgiving. He doesn't hold those against us. We're the only ones that do that. And when we can let that go and let Him take control, the possibilities are endless. Thank you for listening to my testimony, and I hope I can influence just one person by doing this. God bless.